to provide a positive framework from which the population I work with operate from.
Very good. And Dr. Schlunt, you mentioned earlier that these are not personality traits that we talk about, but they are lifestyles, healthy lifestyles, or maybe not so healthy lifestyles. Let's talk about those 5 areas that you indicated, and not only to talk about them, but to sort of give us a little insightful information about each of those areas and some things that you believe that our audience might be able to profit from by hearing this morning.
Well, it's really something that Dr. Walker was saying, is that you really have to individualize a program. And that's a lot of what we were looking at. And the idea is that you can't set a goal and know what you have to do to get there until you know where you're starting from. Okay? So, for example, one of the 5 groups we called chronic dieters. These were women who were coming into the program and from the word go were on a low-calorie diet. They were restricting their food intake. They almost never snacked when it wasn't planned. They almost never said, oh, I lost control and I overate. They really had their calorie intake under control.
They knew how to count calories, and they knew everything that had to do with
Yes, and they were doing a pretty good job of doing it. Now, what are you going to do for somebody like that? Are you going to put them on a diet? Well, there's not that much to change in their eating. Now, these particular women, they might have been able to improve their diet somewhat by cutting the fat content without decreasing the calories any further. But what they really needed was they really needed to address the activity in their life. They probably needed to get more active, to think about 3, 4, 5 times a week getting out and walking or riding a bicycle or doing something that's physically active, and that over a period of a couple years they would see the kind of health improvements that Dr. Walker was talking about, and some reduction in body weight.
Now, these are chronic dieters.
These were called the chronic dieters. There was another group we called the moderate eaters. They had pretty good eating habits. They weren't restricting their calories so much. They pretty much were eating you know, 3 meals a day plus a snack, you know, not having a lot of unplanned snacks, not having a lot of problems with overeating or binge eating. They probably would respond a little bit better to calorie restriction since they were eating more food. But again, you would really want to focus on putting these folks on a low-fat diet, teaching them to do this as a sort of permanent way to eat, a lifestyle change, help them deal with things like the convenience factor and making it fit with their family and so forth, and then getting them to become more active. Now, the 3rd group we called the diet bingers. Okay, now these were women who would try to restrict their food intake and stay on a diet until something happened that would trigger an eating binge. Now, typically, the sort of typical binge was an emotional eating episode.
This is the psychological impact and aspect of
yeah, well, so, for example, let's say you have a job, you come home at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it was a really bad day, you're stressed and upset and angry at your boss, and you walk in and you hit the refrigerator and you eat, you know, until you're ready to go to bed that night. I mean, that might be a typical binge scenario that's triggered by an emotion. You know, other things will trigger it too. Let's say going out to eat with a group of people, a banquet or a party, or going out to a restaurant, or even, you know, going to, let's say, a buffet, a potluck at the church or something. These are kinds of situations that, for the dieters, this would trigger overeating. And so they would alternate back and forth between undereating and overeating and undereating and overeating. Now, to deal with somebody like that, you've got to actually get them to eat more in order to eat less. Part of the problem with the overeating is the restriction. You know, when you binge, then you cut back. And the more you binge, the more you try to cut back, and the harder you try, the harder it gets, and you get into this very unstable pattern. And so for somebody like that, the treatment is very different. You've got to address that dieting. You've got to get them to actually eat, stop skipping meals, eat more food at their meals, and then they suddenly find that it's easier to control themselves. Then you have to address behaviorally, how do you handle going to a party? You know, when you're feeling bored and you're wanting to eat, what could you do instead? Then the 4th group we called the emotional eaters. Now, these were women who didn't really diet. They sort of had the same kind of moderate eating style, but when something stressful happened, they would turn to food. So feeling angry or feeling depressed, you know, possibly right before their period, they're more vulnerable to that, before the menstrual cycle. For somebody who fell into that group, what you would want to do is address this emotional eating. Teach them other ways of coping with their feelings. Direct them either towards, say, what is the problem that's making me feel this way? Can I do something to fix that instead of using food to soothe? Or sometimes things happen and we feel bad. Your dog dies. Well, you know, nothing you can do to bring your dog back, but you can find other ways to constructively deal with those feelings rather than using food, or other people use alcohol or drugs as a way to cover or soothe these feelings. So for somebody like that, it takes really more of a psychological treatment approach. And then our fifth group we called the unrestrained eaters. These were people who basically were eating a high-fat, high-calorie diet, eating most of their food at meals, particularly supper time. They would eat a lot more, let's say at a restaurant, a lot more when they were with their family than when they were alone, but very responsive to the social environment and not really, apparently, very concerned about limiting their food intake.
And so these are the five different styles of eaters that you've identified in this study. And of course, I think, Dr. Walker, when we talk about weight control and lifestyles and et cetera, these last 6 minutes that we have, we also know that these things will play very, very important parts in our overall health. And there's nothing more important now than the national discussion dealing with this whole question of health. What could you say this morning in terms of